This video, I wanted to show you the process of designing the concept using Photoshop. So I go through the whole thing of getting the sketches onto the computer, how to layer up and trace them, adding in all of the colours, the composition, and then finding all the edges so that we can trace it directly onto the canvas. I started as usual with sketches. So I had the boy here, and at the moment moonlight is on his arm because that's exactly how the picture is from How to Train Your Dragon the books, which I'll show you just up here. But obviously that doesn't make a lot of sense if you're talking about a boy playing with his dog, because as much as she'd like to, moonlight can't fly. I've scanned it into my computer and I'm using this, which is the Kamvas 13 graphics tablet. I opened a new file in Photoshop, dragged in that pencil image and then made a new layer, layer 1, on top of that so that I could trace the picture over the top. So here it works like tracing paper, that the layer above is transparent until you draw over the top of it, and you can turn on the little eye to get rid of the picture of the sketch underneath so that you can see exactly what you're drawing. My drawings aren't always the most accurate, so Photoshop really helps you to finish and get that perfect sketch so that it's all ready to get onto the painting. The picture of the boy where he was at the right angle was on a different sketch to the picture where he's facing ahead and had the dragon moonlight on his arm. So I actually combined the two sketches. So now we have 4 layers, a background layer, the layer with the dog, which I've cropped out of the original sketch, and the layer that I've already traced. I realised that I didn't like how long his face was, and using Photoshop meant that I could actually change some of the proportions on the face. I used free transform to squash some areas, and the other parts I just used the rubber and drew them back in. For a while there he started to look like Corey Feldman. So I drew in the Viking hat, which at this point looks quite enormous. You can see as you watch the video that there were occasions actually where the graphics tablet was sort of lagging, so I would start drawing and as the pen moved, the line would take a while to catch up. So when that happened, then I just had to undo and then redraw in those parts. I started to experiment with the size of Moonlight, thinking about making her bigger or smaller. So as here I decided that I wanted his body to be disproportionately smaller, a bit like so that he was more like a cartoon. I planned out the shape of his chest and his arms in just basic 3D shapes, and then I started to colour in around that. Moonlight, dressed up as Toothless, playing make-believe with a boy in the woods. It's based on How to Train Your Dragon, and I really enjoyed doing it.
So again, here I started to think about maybe Moonlight should be flying, so I moved her up. And here was where I decided to place a log in so it would make more sense, and I've got him throwing biscuit or some kind of dog snack on there. Here I've coloured in on the layer that actually has the picture of the dog and the boy on it, and I realised I shouldn't do that, so I actually copied and pasted the log picture onto a different layer to keep the background on a separate layer to the characters. I added a brown background and then used a really large sized brush. I put a large amount of colour in a yellow ochre kind of colour with white across the centre, across the middle. Then I started to block in all of the colours on the trees. I wasn't going for a lot of detail on the background especially. What I wanted to do was to make sure that I picked the right colours that all go together. And the good thing about Photoshop is that you colour in each layer and then you can turn the eye off so that you don't see that layer. So you can work on all of the elements individually. You don't have to worry so much about staying within lines and things like that. So I was just putting the shading in on his face here, just drawing in the shadows. In the past, I've actually used Critter to do drawings, digital concept drawings for paintings. I think for the drawing elements, I do find Critter slightly easier to use. Drawing on Photoshop is really different to drawing on a piece of paper. You don't have the ability to as much press soft or press hard to get different effects. Graphics tablets do allow you to change the pressure a little bit, but I don't find that it's responsive like a pencil is. You can use the magic wand on Photoshop to click on an area of a certain colour and you select a tolerance. The higher the number on tolerance, the more variations of that colour you're going to pick up, and it's a really useful tool if you're trying to change everything in a certain colour or trying to delete everything of a certain colour. So the magic wand tool is really useful for things like if you have green screen, then you would click that green area and then it would pick all of that green up and you can delete it out. And using the brush tool to add in shading around her neck, adding in white as well just across her chest, and a pink tongue and a little pink belly. I decided to actually change the size of Moonlight here so that she was a bit larger in the painting, and here's where I really experimented with changing the background colours.
I like to do it because I'm terrible with choosing colours. If I start a painting and I haven't looked on a computer or I haven't drafted out the colours, I end up picking really silly colours that don't work together, and once you've painted them on the canvas, then having to repaint them is a lot harder.
So again, experimenting with different colours for the foreground grass. Just blocking in shadows on top of the tree log. And this was where our costume started to perhaps come a little bit more green. Everything was a bit yellow and green at this point, so I decided to make the book red. You can mess around with different colours so much on Photoshop. You could never do this to the same level if you were doing a painting, because by the time you change colours that much, you'd ruin the whole thing. I didn't really need to add in the detail elements on the How to Train Your Dragon book, but I wanted to anyway, so I've added those in. I've got a really cartoony fish in there. It was a bit of an afterthought, the fish, but Toothless eats fish, so I added it in, and I quite like the orange, just to add a few more warm colours. And the final touches were really messing around with his fluffy vest top and the colours on his jumper, just to try and get him to stand out a bit more, but not stand out too much. Even once I'd done the painting, I still changed the colour of his fluffy vest and his top. I wanted to add in a few more details, so I put some gems on the top of his helmet, which were like an orangey colour, and then I changed them. There's a lot of changing colours of things once they're put on, and it just helps everything to come together in the end. And darkening up the shadows on the log.
So once I'd specced out all of the colours, I had everything exactly how I wanted. I printed out the picture onto 2 A4 sheets, and I traced them onto the canvas, which I always do. So I've traced it, and it's all ready for me to start painting. If you do find it useful, don't forget to like and subscribe and leave any comments.